Imagine you're lying in a medieval hospital bed. Your fever is rising. The physician approaches with a cup. You drink it gratefully, desperately hoping for relief. You've just consumed a mixture of human skull powder, earthworms, and the rendered fat of a hanged criminal, and your doctor considers this cutting-edge medicine. These weren't fringe practices performed by witches in the woods. These were official treatments prescribed by the most educated physicians of their time. Today, we're diving into the darkest corner of medical history, and I promise you what you're about to hear will make you grateful for modern pharmacies. For most of human history, medicine was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how the body works. The ancient Greeks believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Balance meant health. Imbalance meant disease. And if you were sick, physicians needed to purge, drain, or otherwise remove the offending humor from your body by any means necessary. The medieval Islamic physician Avicenna wrote extensively about the principle of similia, similibus like cures, like. If your brain was sick, you consumed brain matter. If your bones were brittle, you ate bones. This wasn't superstition. This was their version of targeted medicine. Then there was the doctrine of signatures, popular in Europe from the 1500s onward. This theory held that God had marked every plant and substance with a sign indicating its medicinal use. A walnut, which resembles a brain, must cure headaches. Bloodroot, which oozes red sap, must treat blood disorders. And human bodies, well, they contained the most powerful medicine of all, because if animal parts could heal, imagine what human parts could do. Our story begins in ancient Egypt, around 1550 BCE, with a medical document called the Ebers Papyrus. This scroll is over 20 meters long and contains 877 prescriptions for various ailments. Reading it today is like opening a cookbook written in hell. For eye infections, Egyptian physicians prescribed a mixture that included honey, human brain matter, and the excrement of various animals. The logic was straightforward: if something looked infected and pussy, you treated it with something that looked similar. But the Egyptians took a particular interest in one ingredient above all others: crocodile dung. The Nile crocodile was considered sacred, an embodiment of the god Sobek. If the crocodile possessed divine power, then surely its waste must contain healing properties. Women seeking contraception would create vaginal suppositories from crocodile dung mixed with honey and sodium carbonate for digestive issues. They'd consume it orally in smaller quantities, often mixed with beer to mask the taste. Did it work? As contraception, possibly the mixture's acidity might have had spermicidal properties, but at what cost? The risk of infection, the psychological trauma, the sheer biological horror of the practice. Yet this was considered sophisticated medicine. The priest-physicians who prescribed these treatments had studied for years. They kept meticulous records. They believed, genuinely and completely, that they were healing people, and compared to what came later, the Egyptians were almost reasonable. Let's jump forward to ancient Rome. Around 200 CE, you're suffering from epilepsy, the sacred disease as they called it. The seizures are unpredictable, terrifying, and in Roman society, often seen as demonic possession. The cure, according to the physician Pliny the Elder, was simple. You needed to drink the blood of a gladiator, fresh, still warm, ideally taken directly from a wound sustained in the arena. This wasn't metaphorical. Roman citizens would crowd around dying gladiators, cups in hand, waiting to catch the blood as it flowed. They believed that the strength, courage, and vitality of the warrior would transfer to them through his blood, that somehow the warrior's victory over death, even in his dying moments, could cure their affliction. Pliny documented this practice matter-of-factly. Epileptic patients are in the habit of drinking the blood even of gladiators, quaffing, as it were, from living cups. Living cups. Let that image settle. The practice was so common that it became a business. Blood merchants would negotiate with gladiator trainers, purchasing the rights to collect blood from fighters who were expected to die in upcoming games. Wealthy Romans could pre-order specific gladiators whose blood they believed would be particularly potent. But blood was just the beginning. Roman physicians also prescribed gladiator liver, consumed raw, gladiator sweat, scraped from their bodies after fights and mixed into drinks, and for the truly desperate, gladiator bone ash, ground into powder and mixed with wine. The Roman physician Galen, whose medical texts would dominate European medicine for over 1,000 years, recommended human liver for liver disease, human lungs for respiratory problems, and human bone marrow for bone conditions. The human body had become a pharmacy, and the dead were its most valuable inventory. By the Middle Ages, European medicine had absorbed Roman, Greek, Arab, and local folk traditions into a nightmare amalgamation of practices that defied comprehension. But one remedy stands above all others in its sheer industrial-scale horror: mumia, medicine made from mummies. It started with a linguistic confusion. Persian and Arabic physicians used a substance called mumia, a mineral bitumen with legitimate medicinal properties. But when European traders went looking for this wonder drug, they were told it could be found in Egyptian tombs. Mixed with the preserved bodies, the Europeans misunderstood. They thought the bodies themselves were the medicine. By the 12th century, mummy powder had become one of the most sought-after medicines in Europe. Ground human remains, scraped from Egyptian tombs, processed into powder, and consumed for everything from headaches to plague. The apothecaries of London, Paris, and Venice all stocked it. It was expensive. A pound of mummy powder could cost more than gold. Medical texts from the 1500s and 1600s contained detailed recipes for human corpses preserved in honey and instructions on how to identify quality mummy powder. The French surgeon Ambroise Paré, one of the more rational medical minds of the 16th century, wrote passionately against the practice. This wicked kind of drug doth nothing help the diseased. But even his protests couldn't stop the trade. Egyptian tombs were systematically looted. Grave robbers became suppliers to European pharmacies. When ancient mummies became scarce, some merchants began creating fresh ones, executing criminals or using the bodies of the recently deceased, drying them artificially, and grinding them into powder. King Francis I of France carried a pouch of mummy powder mixed with rhubarb with him everywhere, taking it at the first sign of illness. And here's what makes this even more disturbing. It might have occasionally worked, not because of any magical property in the mummy, but because the bitter, caustic powder might have induced vomiting, which medieval physicians interpreted as purging the bad humors. The mummy trade didn't end until the 19th century. Think about that. While Jane Austen was writing novels and Napoleon was conquering Europe, pharmacies in London were still selling ground human remains as medicine. But mummies were just one product in a vast industry of corpse medicine that flourished in Europe. From the 1400s to the 1700s, mellified man or honey-preserved human corpses were considered a delicacy in traditional Chinese medicine, though evidence suggests Europeans attempted to recreate the practice. The process was straightforward. An elderly volunteer would eat nothing but honey for months. When they died naturally saturated with honey, their body would be placed in a stone coffin, filled with more honey and sealed for 100 years. The resulting confection was then portioned out as medicine. Whether this actually happened is debated. What's not debated is that European physicians absolutely believed it worked and attempted their own versions. Then there was corpse fat or axongia hominis. This was rendered human fat, typically taken from executed criminals or casualties of battle. It was rubbed on wounds, consumed for joint pain, and used as a base for medicinal ointments. The Royal College of Physicians in London officially recommended it until the 1700s. Human skull powder, called usnea or cranial moss, was scraped from skulls, preferably from those who died violently, and used to treat epilepsy, paralysis, and internal bleeding. The German physician Oswald Kroll published a recipe in 1609 that called for powdered human skull, mixed with chocolate, to create a palatable medicine. Human urine was perhaps the most widely used human-derived medicine. Aged urine, allowed to ferment for months, was used to treat everything from toothaches to plague. The ammonia content did have antiseptic properties. Then there was oil of man. This was produced by slowly heating human body parts until they rendered into an oily substance. The resulting liquid was applied to treat paralysis, gout, and various skin conditions. The process required fresh bodies, which meant execution days were valuable to physicians. In Germany, the executioner often had a side business, selling body parts from his work. There are documented cases of German executioners becoming wealthy men, not from their official salary, but from their medical supply business. Human bodies weren't the only revolting ingredients in the medieval pharmacopoeia. The natural world provided its own catalogue of horrors. For tuberculosis, a disease that killed millions, the prescribed treatment in 17th century England was to consume a live puppy. Not puppy meat. A whole, living puppy, force-fed to the patient in the belief that the puppy's life force would cure the disease. The physician Thomas Willis documented this practice in his 1667 medical text, without any apparent moral qualms. For rabies, another deadly disease, the standard treatment involved taking a hair from the dog that bit you and placing it in the wound. When that inevitably failed, physicians would prescribe dog skull soup, the head of a rabid dog, boiled and consumed as broth. Earthworm powder was used for everything. Worms were collected, washed, dried, ground up, and added to medicines. The 16th century Worthy Book of Distillation contains dozens of recipes, featuring earthworms as a primary ingredient. Spiderwebs consumed in balls of butter for malaria. Dried toad powder for the plague. Mouse paste ground, mice mixed with honey for smallpox. And then there was bezoar, a stone taken from the stomach of goats or other ruminants. These stones, formed from undigested matter, were believed to be universal antidotes to poison. They were so valuable that wealthy individuals owned personal bezoar stones, kept in ornate cases, to be dipped into any drink suspected of being poisoned. Queen Elizabeth I owned several. King Charles II of England patented his own recipe called the King's Drops, which included bezoar stone, human skull, and spirits of wine. Did any of this work? The bezoar stones, interestingly, might have absorbed some toxins, but the vast majority of these treatments were useless at best and actively harmful at worst. So, when did this madness end? Slowly, painfully slowly, the 18th century saw the rise of more scientific approaches to medicine, but corpse medicine persisted. As late as 1908, German pharmaceutical companies were still producing medicines containing human blood and bone marrow. The real turning point came with germ theory in the 1860s and 1870s, when Pasteur and Koch proved that invisible microorganisms caused disease. The entire theoretical foundation of traditional medicine collapsed. If disease was caused by germs, then drinking skull powder or mummy dust couldn't possibly cure it. But old practices die hard. Traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and various folk traditions continued using some of these ingredients into the 20th century. Even today, there are places where bear bile, tiger bone, and rhino horn are sold as medicine, following the same cures, like logic that led medieval Europeans to consume ground mummy. The difference now is that we know better. We have the scientific method. We have clinical trials. We have evidence-based medicine. But for thousands of years, humanity was stumbling in the dark, trying anything and everything to cure disease and extend life.